Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we got another news and rumor video talking about some signings from our past couple days and some trade rumors involving the Jets, the Predators, the Canadiens, the Blue Jackets, and the Flames. We'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video here at the Internet Hockey Channel. Now before we end this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe down below, thank you for your support when you're able to with love you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below, and don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below so we can all discuss today's video. Now, in this video, we're going to start today's video off by discussing some signings from our past couple of days. We had a lot of interesting signings, so we'll get to all those here. First, one signing we did miss on July 11th was another ELC to a top 16 pick from this past year's draft, and that's Michael Brandsegg Nygard, who was, I think, if I'm correct, the 15th overall pick in the 2024 draft. Gets his 3-year ELC with a AAV of $975,000. Looks like eventually could be a solid middle six power forward. Has some really good size to him. Could play over in Europe this year. Could play back in the AHL. So we'll have to wait and see. But that's a pretty good sign there for the Red Wings to get their first round pick from this past year's draft locked up. Then we saw a couple of other signings yesterday. We saw Michael Callahan sign a 1-year league minimum deal with the Bruins. I'm pretty sure he was an RFA and one of their own players. But he's going to play in the AHL next year. So it's some good depth, but it's not overly huge signing. Then we saw the Rangers bring back Chad Ruhwedel. They brought him in a trade they made just before deadline, if I'm correct. But he gets a 1-year league minimum deal. Should be a solid 7th-8th defenseman there for the New York Rangers. And then the Boston Bruins also signed Regula, 1-year league minimum deal. Really good call-up option defenseman there. So it's a pretty good pickup there for the Bruins to keep Regula around. And then the Columbus Blue Jackets signed Greaves to a 2-year deal with an AAV of $813,000. So that's pretty good. Greaves was one of the guys who did have an arbitration case scheduled, so it's good to see he got signed. It looks like he's going to be a solid third-string goaltender for the Jackets this year, so pretty good solid sign there for the Jackets to get Greaves signed, and I think long-term he could still be the backup on that team. So pretty good pickup there for the Jackets to get Greaves and avoid arbitration with him. And then earlier today, right before the recording of this video, we saw Schneider get a 2-year deal with an AAV of $2.2 million. They'll begin to start next year. So pretty good sign there for the Rangers. I thought Schneider would have probably gone between $3 and $4 million, given how well he played last year, but to get him at 2 years only 2.2 is pretty good in my opinion. So solid sign there for the Rangers, and Schneider's now locked up and they have a little more of a clearer picture as to what they need to sign Ryan Lindgren to and if they need to still move Trouba. So interesting stuff there, but those are some pretty interesting signs from the past little while. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. Now first we'll start with the Winnipeg Jets and McGroarty. According to a lot of reports, it sounds like the McGroarty situation is getting a little bit ugly. McGroarty at this point is a good NCAA player. He showed that last year. But a lot of teams who want to acquire McGroarty want him to maybe have a little bit of development time first, like try and get him in a top 6 AHL role after he signs before being a consistent NHL forward. And McGroarty, according to a lot of reports, won't sign an NHL contract until he's guaranteed top 9 minutes, and that's sort of throwing off a lot of teams. There's apparently a couple of reports saying the Canadiens were offering something like Philip Mesar in a 2025 first rounder to try and get McGroarty, and it never worked out. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what happens for the Jets and McGroarty. I mean, like we said, the Canadiens, it sounded like, according to a couple of reports a couple of days ago, had offered something like Philip Mesar in a 2025 first round pick, maybe something else as well, but then it sounded like they backed out because McGroarty is thinking of himself as already an NHL established player when he's not. So there's been some teams who have been linked to him. I've heard Minnesota's name. I'm sure some of the younger teams out there like Anaheim, Chicago, San Jose also have an interest, and I'm sure the Jets will be able to get a solid return for the former 14th overall pick. But with the way McGroarty's going around things right now, he's just hurting his value, and I don't think he'll be able to get a legit NHL role right from the get-go. I think he's going to have to figure out that if he's going to sign his next contract, he's going to have to play some point either in the bottom 6 or at the AHL level. And I think that's just a fact of the matter. I mean, I don't think McGroarty's established himself enough to right out from the gate be a top 9 forward. And I think his attitude and the way he's going around doing things is sort of throwing teams off. It sounded like there was maybe a team out there who had an offer on the table as well. I think it was last weekend, and they pulled away from it after talking to McGroarty. So it's going to be interesting to see. I still think McGroarty will get moved at some point. You just may have to lower the asking price, and there may have to be a team out there who sort of at least guarantees him like a third line role at the NHL level to start out with. So it'll be interesting to see. But all of this with McGroarty is thinking that he's a good NHL player and he deserves to play at the NHL level already when he's only playing the NCAA so far, it's sort of throwing off teams and sort of holding up a trade at this point. So I'll have to wait and see on what happens there, but that's the update with Regula McGroarty. When it comes to Patrik Laine and the Columbus Blue Jackets, on a recent mailbag question thing on NHL.com, Dan Rosen was talking about Patrik Laine, and he got a question saying, is the Laine situation similar to Kuznetsov's situation? Now, he said it's not identical, but there are some similarities. Now, if you look at Laine and Kuznetsov, both these guys had not worked out the previous year before they were moved. Kuznetsov in Washington, Laine in Columbus, just it hasn't worked out over really well. Kuznetsov was dealt by the Capitals this past trade deadline to the Carolina Hurricanes with 1.5 years left on his contract and 50% of his contract retained for a third-round pick. Now, that made a lot of people think, could Laine be had for the third-round pick? Now, there's a couple of differences. First, Kuznetsov, I think, had an even $7 million cap hit. Laine has an $8.7 million cap hit. So half of Kuznetsov's contract was, I think, 3.5. Half of Laine's contract is going to be 4.35. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult to acquire Laine, a little bit more expensive, even if they were to retain 50% of his contract. B, Laine has 2 years left on his deal. Kuznetsov had 1.5 when he was dealt. So that's another thing that's a little bit different. Another thing, though, is the upside Laine has. Kuznetsov, I think, is in his mid to late 30s. Laine's, I think, just turned 26 or 27. So Laine's a fair bit younger. Laine also has a former 40 goals performance, and with him being younger, has a lot more potential to be a solid NHL forward. So there's a little bit more upside when it comes to Laine. Laine also has more term than Kuznetsov did. So I've seen a lot of people say that I don't think it'll be a third-round pick, but if Laine was to be dealt, had 50% of his contract retained, there's a very likely chance that, according to Dan Rosen, it could be a second or potentially even a first-round pick. Now, I would stress a first-round pick. I don't think that would get Laine, but if you can get like a second or a third-round pick for moving on from Laine at 50% of his contract, I think the Jackets would do that in a heartbeat. Now, like I said, there's still some questions about him in the Players Assistance Program, so that's sort of holding up a deal, but we've heard about teams like Seattle, like Minnesota. I wouldn't be surprised if a team like Calgary had some interest too, maybe even Utah. So there are some teams out there who I think would definitely love to add a guy like a Patrik Laine, and I think there would be some teams who really do like that, so we'll have to wait and see on what happens there. But according to Dan Rosen on NHL.com, there is some similarities between Laine and Kuznetsov, and asking a price for Laine with 50% of his contract retained with his upside still might be something like a second-round pick, maybe a second-round pick plus, so we'll have to wait and see on that, but that would be a really good trade in my opinion for the Jackets. Going over to the Canadiens, there's been some recent talk out there. We talked about Broberg offer sheet a little while ago. Could the Montreal Canadiens offer sheet Seth Jarvis? Now, this is a little bit of a stretch, but we know that the Carolina Hurricanes and Montreal Canadiens have had offer sheet battles over the past couple of years. I think it was back in 2019, if I'm correct. Sebastian Aho was offer sheeted by the Montreal Canadiens. Canes quickly matched, so it was a decent offer sheet attempt there from the Canadiens. Then the Hurricanes were angry at them, so a couple of years later, they offer sheeted Kotkaniemi, 1 year, $6 million. They never matched. Montreal got the Hurricanes' first and third round pick that year, and then they traded that for Christian Dvorak. Dvorak's never really worked out for Montreal, so that's never worked out for Montreal. And Kotkaniemi, after signing an 8 year, I think it was $4.85 million deal, has never worked out in Carolina either. So I don't think that sort of an offer sheet has really worked out for either of those teams. But now there's been some talk about the Canes maybe offering Seth Jarvis. Now, the Canes still, I think, have over $10 million in cap space to sign guys like Jarvis and Natchez, so it would not be overly difficult to match an offer sheet. But I mean, if you look at the offer sheet compensation right now, if they were to get him at under 6.875, it would cost the Canadiens a first and third round pick to acquire him. If they were to get him under 9.16 mil, which is probably somewhere I would have to say, I think if it was between 6.87 and 9.16, the Hurricanes will be hard pressed to try and match that. It will cost a first, a second, and a third round pick. So for Canadiens team who's probably still going to have a bottom 10 pick this year, would it really make sense to move on from the first, second, and third round pick to acquire Seth Jarvis? I definitely think Jarvis will be a fantastic player in Montreal. I could definitely work on like a first or second line with guys like Caulfield and Suzuki and things like that. But to give up their first, second, and third round pick, which is what they would probably have to do to make sure that the Hurricanes will not match that sort of a deal, would that really make them a whole bunch better? I'm not exactly sure. So we're going to have to wait and see. Like I said, an offer sheet would probably have to be something along the lines of either like a 1 year deal at around $8.5, $9 million, or if they want to do a longer term deal, probably like 5 to 6 at like $8.5 million for Jarvis, if they were trying to get him from Carolina. So it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for nonetheless, but it's something that I don't see happening personally, so we'll have to wait and see on that. But it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for, as there's been some recent speculation that Jarvis could be offer sheeted by the Montreal Canadiens. Next, going over to the Nashville Predators, there's been some recent talk more about Yaroslav Askarov in Nashville. Now, according to a couple of recent reports, Dan Milstein, who's Askarov's agent, he said that they've been talking with the Nashville Predators about potential options. Milstein says that Askarov is going to be a future stud at the NHL level, and he's just figuring out if it's going to be in Nashville or somewhere else. They are discussing the potentiality of a trade there, so it's got a lot of people thinking, could they still trade Askarov? There will be a lot of teams out there who may not have Askarov in the NHL this year, but I think is a really good AHL guy who could be a third stringer, and I think eventually in the not too distant future could be a really good starter. Now, I think a team who could maybe have some question marks at backup and also doesn't have a really solid starter for the future could definitely look to try and acquire Askarov. It will definitely take a high asking price, and the Predators are definitely not unwilling to try and keep Askarov for sure, but it definitely sounds like with this new Saros extension, him being there for the next 9 years, it's going to push Askarov out for at least the next little bit, and with Woodrow signing a 2-year deal, that'll mean Askarov will basically have to be a third stringer for at least the next 2 years, and I'm not sure if Askarov really wants that, so we're going to have to wait and see what happens here. It's possible we could see a trade, probably more likely at this point that at least he starts in the AHL, and if there is a trade sometime between now and next off season, so it's going to be an interesting situation to watch out for. But with Askarov now pushed down to minor time, it's quite possible that he may ask for a trade or may look to try and get a trade from the Nashville Predators, so we'll have to wait and see what happens there, but it definitely does sound like Askarov is potentially still talking about a trade with the Predators, and we shall see if that winds up happening. And lastly, going over to the Calgary Flames and New York Islanders. I've seen some reports about this. Once again, can't confirm these are 100% legit sources, but I have seen some reports over on Twitter, or whatever you want to call it, saying that the Flames and Islanders are talking about a deal to send someone who is on a bad contract for New York to Calgary. Now, I know the Flames have a ton of cap space, could definitely use some more pieces. They look to be willing to acquire some not so good contracts if it was able to get them some picks and prospects. Could one of Anders Lee or Jean-Gabriel Pageau be of interest to the Calgary Flames? Now, I think it's quite possible. I'm not saying it's 100% guarantee, but I think Lee at 2 years at $7 million would be a very fantastic fit for Flames, who could be a really good veteran addition. And Pageau, I think, is a little bit less likely given all the centers they have. But I think there's a likely chance that the Flames and Islanders could hook up on a deal. My guess would be if it's Anders Lee, he's got 2 years left at $7 million. It would be a very high price tag to take off. It would allow them to get the cap space to go after a guy like Nikolai Ehlers. So it would be a smart move there for the Islanders, but I think it would have to include, I don't think they would get a first round pick for it, but it could see something like Anders Lee, maybe a second round pick, and maybe Oliver Wahlstrom be dealt to the Calgary Flames. You know, they're looking for some more younger players. I think Wahlstrom could be a really good fit in Calgary. They could get another prospect, and they could take on the Anders Lee contract, which I don't think is completely out and eligible next year when he's only got 1 year left on his deal. So we'll have to wait and see what happens here, but there has been some recent talk about the Flames and Islanders hooking up on a deal. I think there's a very likely chance that the Flames could try and get one of Anders Lee or Jean-Gabriel Pageau, help the Islanders out of their difficult cap situation, and in return, I think there's a very likely chance that the Islanders could wind up moving on from something like a second round pick or an Oliver Wahlstrom or something like that. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's all I'm going to talk about for today. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on all of this down in the comment section below. What do you think about all we discussed here today? Do the Flames and Islanders hook up on a deal, and if so, who's involved? Does Askarov get dealt by Nashville? Does Laine get dealt at this point by the Jackets? Does McGroarty get dealt by the Jets? And does Jarvis get offer sheeted by the Canes? Plus, what do you think about the signings from our past couple of days? Definitely have to get thoughts on all of that down in the comment section below. So I'm going to talk about for today. Until this video, if you're liking, subscribe down below. Thank you for your support. We're able to with you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to leave a comment down in the comment section below. So you can also listen to today's video. Also, the blog, to my news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. Leave it down in the description below. And kind of see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.